It begins in silence, a silence that tastes of dust, of fabric left untouched for too long, of empire halls that now echo not with footsteps of ambition, but with ghosts. Amancio Ortega sits alone in a leather chair, eyes lost in the dim reflection of a window that shows him nothing but himself, an old man who once dared to build a world of clothing, who once dared to bend fabric and markets to his will. Outside, the city moves as it always has. Shoppers walk beneath the neon lights of his stores, bags swinging from their hands, unaware that the man who gave them this ritual of consumption sits with a question he cannot silence. Was it worth it? The empire of Zara, of Inditex, of endless stores spreading across continents, had been born from a single decision. And every decision, he knows now, leaves scars on others, and most cruelly on the one who decides. For what is fortune, if not the perfect disguise for loneliness? What is victory, if not another word for exile from the life one might have lived? He closes his eyes, and he is no longer in the present. He is back in Galicia, in a house too small to contain his hunger. His father, a railway worker. His mother, a maid. Poverty was the thread stitched into every piece of clothing they wore, a fabric too rough, too permanent. Ortega remembers the day he overheard his mother being refused credit at a local store. He was a boy, small and invisible, and yet that moment carved itself into him with a sharpness no years could dull. The humiliation of dependence, the helplessness of being at the mercy of others. From that instant, he vowed never again to kneel before anyone. But vows made in the fire of childhood carry a dangerous weight when they grow into adulthood. They become obsessions, and obsessions demand sacrifices. Years later, Ortega found himself working in the world of textiles, carrying bolts of fabric on his shoulders, cutting patterns in dim workshops, learning the rhythms of a trade he had not chosen, but which had chosen him. The sewing machines sang their relentless song around him, stitching dreams for others. And Ortega, quiet, always quiet, was learning. He studied how clothes were made, how customers bought, how desire could be created and fed. But what he learned most of all was that the old system was slow, inefficient, trapped in tradition. Retailers guessed what people wanted, manufactured months in advance, and prayed the demand would follow. Ortega hated that word prayer. He didn't believe in prayer. He believed in control. That was the seed of his decision. The moment came in the 1970s. Spain was changing, trembling under the last years of dictatorship, uncertain of its own future. Ortega stood in a cramped space in a caruca, staring at piles of fabric that would soon become bathrobes. Bathrobes, of all things. They were not glamorous, but they were his first creation. He had founded a small workshop, Confecciones Goa, and with his then-wife, Rosalia, he sold his robes at prices so low the competitors could barely breathe. Customers came. They always came where value met hunger. But bathrobes were not an empire. They were survival. And Ortega's hunger was greater than survival. He wanted dominance. It was Rosalia who first spoke the word, Zara, a store, their own store, to sell directly, not through intermediaries. Ortega remembers the night he walked the empty street after hearing her idea. The lamps cast their pale glow, and in the silence he felt the pull of something vast. It was not about one store. It was about control from start to finish. Design, production, distribution, sale. The entire chain in his grasp. It was madness. It was impossible. And it was the only path forward. Here lay the decision that changed everything. To seize control of the entire supply chain, to make clothes not for seasons, but for weeks, to build a machine that could turn fabric into desire almost overnight. Others would have laughed. Others would have feared the risk. Ortega embraced it. For him, fear was fuel. He imagined a store where new clothes appeared every few days, where scarcity itself was the hook, where customers felt the urgency to buy because tomorrow the item might be gone forever. Fast fashion before anyone had dared to name it. It was brutal, efficient, relentless like him. But decisions of such magnitude are not made in boardrooms with neat charts and polished shoes. They are made in shadows, with sweat and borrowed money, with silence and sleepless nights. Ortega gambled everything: his reputation, his family's security, his future. He took loans. He pushed his workers harder. He demanded speed that seemed impossible. Factories scrambled. Drivers raced against time. Designers sketched furiously. And he stood at the center of the storm, never blinking, ever speaking more than necessary. Zara opened its doors in 1975. The store was modest, almost ordinary. But something was different. Customers entered, touched the fabric, saw prices they could afford, and felt the trap closing around them. They bought. They told others. They returned again and again, drawn by the rhythm of change, the rush of novelty. Ortega had found the formula, and it would not let him go. Yet with every success, a cost was extracted. His marriage began to wither. Rosalia, who had stood by his side, who had shared the first dream, became a shadow at the edge of his empire. Ortega was consumed by work, by the endless expansion, by the machinery he was building. He was not cruel. He was absent. And absence, as he learned, can be more devastating than cruelty. The empire grew. The family strained. Still, he pressed forward. Inditex was born, and with it came the expansion beyond Spain. Portugal, France, the world. Stores multiplied, thousands of them, like mirrors reflecting the same hunger across continents. Ortega became a billionaire, but money was never the true goal. The true goal was control, the assurance that no one could humiliate him, no one could refuse him, no one could reduce him to that powerless child overhearing his mother's shame. And yet, in his relentless climb, he began to see the shadows his decision had cast. Factories stretched thin across nations, workers laboring for wages that barely sustained them. The machine demanded speed, and speed demanded sacrifice. Ortega knew it. He did not speak of it. Silence was his shield. But silence does not erase guilt, it only buries it deeper. Now in the present, he sits in that leather chair, staring at himself in the window, and he wonders, when does control become another kind of prison? When does victory turn hollow? He owns more wealth than he could ever spend, more stores than he could ever visit, more power than the boy in Galicia could have dreamed. And yet he feels the weight of solitude, pressing harder with every breath. His decisions gave him the world, but they also carved him out of it, leaving only the shell of a man who no longer knows whether he shaped destiny or whether destiny shaped him. But to understand the full price, you must see the years that followed, the expansions, the triumphs, and the ghosts they summoned. You must walk with him through the corridors of fortune and failure alike. He remembers the day they told him, richest man in Europe, for a brief moment even surpassing Bill Gates. The newspapers, the analysts, the endless headlines, they all celebrated him as the silent king of fast fashion. Silent, yes, always silent. Ortega had never given speeches, never sought cameras, never loved the stage. He ruled from the shadows, letting Zara's glass storefronts and endless racks of clothing speak louder than he ever could. To the public, he was a ghost with billions, a man without words, a man whose empire dressed millions, yet remained faceless. And in that silence, he was alone. Expansion had become a drug. From Spain to New York, from Shanghai to São Paulo, Inditex stretched its veins across the globe, pumping garments like lifeblood into every city, every mall, every street. The pace was ruthless. 2 weeks from sketch to store, a rhythm that destroyed the old ways of fashion. Competitors gasped for air. Department stores crumbled. Designers mocked him at first, then trembled, been imitated. Ortega had broken the code, rewritten the rules. But rules, once broken, release demons you cannot control. He remembers visiting a factory in Bangladesh, unannounced. He walked the floor, seeing lines of women hunched over machines, eyes hollow, fingers trembling from exhaustion. The air was thick, metallic, filled with the sound of 1,000 needles biting fabric. They looked at him with the faintest curiosity. Most did not even know who he was. To them, he was just another man in a crisp shirt, another shadow from the distant west. He left without speaking. He did not need to. He had seen what he needed to see. The machine was working, perfectly, efficiently, brutally. That night, alone in his hotel, he drank wine he could not taste and stared at the ceiling. He told himself it was inevitable. Progress was always paid for by someone. And he had already chosen, long ago, never to be the one paying. But the guilt seeped in, slow as water through stone. His daughter, Sandra, became a point of light in his darkness. She carried his blood, but not his silence. She lived differently, more open, more present. Ortega watched her, at times with pride, at times with envy. Could she escape the curse of ambition? Could she build without burning herself hollow? He tried, in his own way, to pass the empire to her. But he knew every inheritance is also a burden, and his burden was heavy. The empire reached its peak. Stores in every corner, billions in revenue, Zara bags swinging in countless hands. Ortega, now old, withdrew further into shadows. He avoided interviews, public appearances, ceremonies. Even his employees rarely heard his voice. To them, he was a myth, a man who existed only in rumors and photographs. He lived modestly compared to his wealth, avoiding luxury, avoiding ostentation. But modesty is not the same as peace. Inside him, the storms never ceased. He could not escape the memory of that decision, the leap into vertical integration, the invention of fast fashion, the relentless speed he had unleashed. It had brought him everything, and it had taken everything. In moments of reflection, he thought of Rosalia, the woman who had once stood beside him. She had passed away, and he carried her memory like a scar. Had he lost her to ambition? Had she been the first casualty of his hunger? He did not say these words aloud. He never did. But in the privacy of his thoughts, the truth whispered back. And so came the paradox of his life. To the world, he was proof that a man born in poverty could rise to unimaginable heights. To himself, he was proof that the higher you climb, the more airless the summit becomes. Every decision that had built Zara had also built a cage around him, a cage of responsibility, of silence, of endless consequences. He wonders often about the boy. He once was the boy in Galicia, listening to his mother being humiliated in a shop. What would that boy think of the man he became? Would he feel pride? Or would he feel fear? Ortega knows the answer, though he rarely admits it. The boy would not recognize him. There are nights when he dreams of fabric, not as merchandise, but as ghosts. Each garment stitched with stories he cannot control, stories of workers, of buyers, of lives touched and twisted by the empire he created. He wakes in the darkness, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, and he feels the weight of every decision pressing down. And yet, he does not regret, not entirely. Regret is too soft a word. What he feels is something darker, something harder, inevitability. As if the path had been laid the moment he made that vow as a child. As if he had never truly chosen at all, only followed the logic of hunger, of pride, of fear. Now, old age brings clarity, but not peace. He knows that when he dies, Zara will outlive him. Inditex will keep moving, keep churning, keep feeding the world its cycle of desire and consumption. His name will fade, but his decision will remain, stitched into the fabric of modern life. That, perhaps, is the cruelest immortality, not to be remembered as a man, but to be felt as a machine. In rare moments, he allows himself honesty. He admits that his empire was not built only on vision, or on innovation, or on brilliance. It was built on a wound. The wound of poverty, the wound of humiliation, the wound of a boy who swore never to bow again. And wounds, when left unhealed, do not close. They spread, they consume, they demand. So here he sits, in the silence of his leather chair, looking at his reflection in the window. He sees not just a man, but a question. Was it worth it? He has asked himself that question countless times, and he knows he will die without an answer. Perhaps the answer does not exist. Perhaps some decisions are too vast, too tangled, to be judged in simple terms of worth or waste. What he knows is this: a single decision can change everything. A decision made in ambition, in hunger, in fear, can create worlds and destroy them. It can elevate you beyond imagination and exile you from yourself. That is the true cost of power. Not money, not fame, but the slow erosion of the soul. He closes his eyes. The silence deepens. Outside, the city moves on, unaware. Inside, Amancio Ortega remains a prisoner of his own empire, a man who clothed the world and yet could never clothe his own emptiness. The story does not end with triumph. It does not end with despair. It ends with the truth, bitter and unyielding. Every decision carries a price, and some prices can never be paid in full.